70.
Thanksgiving Day, 2024. An excerpt from Part 3 insert of 70 by Ely James. Rated R for truth. The front inside not the lessor factor, circumferential and inside of the mind when young soldiers long since aware of this experience of strangulating atrophy together recalled how that during close quarter combat like this they didn't have to think to force awareness of it out of the mind. Experiencing the affliction from a product of man's ingenuity that preferred no one certain age as sure as in the old world a minimal percentage of men grown into latest of late years might find a natural decline of fresh recall and minds wherewithal without attributing such to post-traumatic experience resulting from woes of protracted and asphyxiating warfare and the external contaminant contractings that were also contributors to degenerative impairments. Draftees commissioned into service who were undergoing effects from community treatments of plague were seen as being on equal footing with the troops and scarcely as the rule faring the better than with a. Working out the combat muscle and acclimating to foreign soils used to award the advantage that only practice and familiarity could give. The silver lining. Of the several men and women setting out overseas on mission comprising the majority still in persons who hadn't taken the implant solution and the many had just made it through boot camp. Scored their various paperwork and clearances where applicable and thereby missed the mandate requiring that all commissioned and civilians alike surrender habitions. Misgivings and objections. 'Twas clear that the kind of enemy they were up against was sold on the so-called advantages of the biometrics industry's panacea cure-all up to the point when anomalies exacerbated by infections as the visual testimony was readily apparent. In dark pink markings grew and wounds prematurely scarred the flesh from conditions that had already been referred to by medical practitioners as incurable leprosy manifestations. The hot itching was commonly said to be something bothersome before the inability to satisfy with a scratch sent the impulse that was insufferable agony that wouldn't quit until the point was reached where clear sight itself would quit, as, after light contusions worsened into boils that finally turned into scabs and then seeping carcinomas blinding the eyes. You had to have an opponent either in your gun's scope or you had to be as close to them as people running with them to see them. That's unless between you and the implanted person with plague forms that were said to be opted for there wasn't a brisk zephyr passing through to evidence what was only about as subtle as were sword sticks held to the nose. The pungent odor only the implanted subject could get used to, but the disorienting bouts of delirium could only put them down and not out. There was something yet concealed about this thing and many a graveyard and embalming lab conspired to keep it secret. This thing chased you not like a plague. This nasty thing hunted you down like death itself only to ever elude you. The devil's full essence was in the details. Here these soldiers acting in the capacity of commandants as they referred to themselves who'd made their irrevocable decisions. The angel by the God of heaven and earth sent yearned for power and accepted the kind of freedom that they'd felt was conducive to the pursuit of their ambitions. Instead of warning by the Lord sent they elected the brand of freedom and empowerment endorsed by Nasser Abu Matter Hussein and engineered by one of his own in Guildford Winston Bates with his patented biometrics industries. Without so much as speaking a word he received free PR these days when any of his customers had dripped on past your path. He scarcely had a customer though under his global mandate during these hours and 'twas less about the product enterprisable but 'twas more about universal control. Hence, on both the side of his own and of the other squad he had prisoners. The tattoo seen from far away in these who still falsely thought of Christians and Jews as their greatest enemy when 'twas when playing God they forever distanced themselves from him and thereby revealed who their war was really wages against. These ones with only the power to promote the believer by assaulting the body through death, retaining their technical disadvantage, as leading to their inability to naturally die, amongst their number was there in the least bit one winner to name. What is this? Better you hopes that the big guy doesn't swing today into the camp right now's it was only me. Do you think this is Fiddler on the Roof or somethings? He sings like a gayo a little strudel with your dreidel and somethings about meeting his yentals in a kibbutzim ghettos and the likes. The men only laughed upon ascertaining ahead of time if that's what the charge had hoped to garner, as careful as they were to respond silently in some certain fashion. Put the toys away and reaffix the screw to the plates in your heads. You are to pay attention to the presentations and you, I think, you, are the one to gives the synopsis tail end brief to summarize for the others. Does that get your attention? You can play with dreidel and end up in the ditches outside the BarbedWires too, if you like. The soldier sat straighter in his chair, pushed back as soon as the man angrily approached to grab the top losing its spin. He smashed it against the wall and gave him an unambiguous warning that had something to do with a spin-off tip dislodging patches of unpainted drywall material and careening off of the floor and an eyeball. He perfectly understood, plumb and then darn near sulker. The guards either nonchalantly and as though convening over a trivial matter or breathlessly with eyes fastened on the large screen in front of which stood the charge official amongst them. Commandants in uniforms neatly dressed and fastidiously kept in appearance while with hands folded sitting at the table and grazing or with laser beam focus extrapolating and conceptualizing. With pencils held over paper or with fingers hovering over top of laptop keys while sensors in both awaited the order sent from such rumination and copious notes extrapolation and transfer originating from their man in charge. 10 quadrants from the same number of commission divides of Middle and Far Eastern world's land terra firma zones were represented within composed and charted items of interest. Borrowing generically from earliest Neanderthal warrior, perhaps as simple words were to on this pencil laser tip screen designed to spur on more elaborate specificity in the product of this think tank's qualified input. The words contain and detain, civilian zone inside of 3 of the 10 blocks, again, more than likely borrowing from strategies of armies once here and moved on, CENSOR, involuntary for recruit, high resistance with casualties likely, threat zone red. This inside of 4 sections, 2 large sized to the one mid and the other small. 3 zones said dense, sparsely populated, FORTIFIABLES and for refugees and POWs and cover and installation like your present location, and several munitions cache locations, and underground maze, CPO, or classified personnel only, and finally, frail detainees or otherwise women with small children. You might recall Joel's journal entry then, dear readers, where as a youth into the word without mention of names of cities he'd jotted down these very contents in scribbly font that to the letter matched the commandant charge's writing. The Nazi-like design copied by the hand propelled by the stuff's a frightening sanity disrepairing nightmare in what was hoped would be the prophecy of none of his to date that had failed. He said only had a few outstanding. Turns out a loosely but discernible world map was that which he'd drawn these notes to on some musical score sheet drifting across diary pages. That's notation included the plenty rest notes, the majority of which were jotted down in the USA area of map with Joel's words added. And from that portion missing much to the chagrin of federal investigators. That copy containing what they'd referred to as simple, the verses of finality. It was found hidden in Joel's attic as his mother and father's own best-kept secret. Outcome of the election to determine the path of the one Alexander or Alexandra, conspirators with Esau, as world's eye despite jaundiced rhetoric is turned toward Jacob, hidden out in the open, prominent only where aboundingly in obscure. Follow the path of the maniacle Austrian behind to see what does unfold ahead, history's stutter speak repeat. And the eagle on the free frontier for what doesn't. A 39 plus 8 with 2 years added on for hindsight, we should have seen it in advance. How chilling. Joel's father with the United Nations Assembly for Israel, New York satellite. How ironic his future appointment making a dad proud but so utterly terribly distressed beyond description when called to answer to the FBI for his preteen for containing such info, some of which had ahead of Joel Jr. led the men curiously to terrorists in Saudi Arabia and to Iran. So ahead of time the boy read tomorrow's newspapers today and whatever nation in any way had a claim on him he could for them see with marked clarity, as odd as clearly denoted, into the arrangement of secret keeping stars thithertop. Your job to step into the cosmos, Eli says and writes to me, let God do the speaking on your every step. As with one Michelangelo with paintbrush tip against ceiling or one Mitchell Nastrodamus with head caught in same stars wherever there was a ceiling in the least. As his night terrors foretold. He was in some inexplicable pledge with the unseen in its fatalistic sense that ever painted its own Desiree painting where with other hand the tools of the maestro George Frederick Handel was held in heart. A result of voracious reading and the study was of unchaste great minds, his dad had quipped to the bureau before Junior would in the future regularly share meal and clock hours with the same, received as a prodigy more so than peer. Loves God more than dear life itself, added in hushed tones. And then it happened. Fences made mercurable when men dressed neither in military garb nor prisoner of war smock and pants stepped out into the outside fields surrounding the barbed wire fencing. Gunmen unmoved and without inquiry or so much as readjusting position to see who these men were as though. Faces stiffened yet with eyes opened wide as the articulating voices for them. On the 4 sides of the encampment in broad daylight gathered in measured even steps these men, neither lunges or a creeping crawling but a determined unquestioning straight cool unfettered gait shared as one beeline path, only from respective sides, 12 in total and 3 men per. As even as block men underneath the plastic bubble in the game's arcade connected to protruding metal paddle rods when one stopped they all did and where they stopped this square's coordinate point mapping featured equidistant mooring mounts that these men suddenly were, one man perfectly across from and facing the other before the winds whipped up into some fantastic whirling chant of a howling chorus-tuned dirge. And how is it that these soldiers still nonchalantly and disinterestedly watched on, one striking the match against the facility house pole that he leaned against with booted foot holding the house and him up. Another cluster of soldiers sat alongside the ridge of the wraparound trench, from the insides and lining of such that detainees shielded their gazes or gathered toward perfect center inside. Noticing how that only birds gather up overhead alongside the stretchers unnerved them something terrible while these helmeted men with rifles used as crutches when standing and in free hands holding playing cards pointed and laughed in odd cackling exclamations of either enthused amazement or deriding in jocular jousting at the lack of successes of the card tossers. In hysterics and seated with their legs dangling as though over the sides of sand or tar-pitch trenches and feeling invincible while sitting there as these men like toddlers in a playground had over top of their toil heaped on bemused merriment. Like the men looking on from facility house and gathering at tree copse thickets, the others from reclining positions from hoods of earth-removing tractors, Humvees and hoods of cars took no special notice of any of these 12 men, only their effect as later dawn had made like the twilight preceding dusk, with several incremental layers of shadow at once shifting as though on forwarded rhyme-lapse video played back. 'Twas as if the light switch or volume knob was instantly manipulated when the observable half of the football-sized field drenched in daylight washing over with a drab of shadow consuming highlighted the circumferential edges still flitting about and tousled with the flight of sparrows and other birds. The otherwise calm of environment after those tree-lime lowering wind gusts blitzkrieged on through made like retracting sea over sands covered over, or the wash of spout torrents at the kitchen sink clearing out of the sieve granules of coffee when even light on faces alerted to a sudden and premature shift. Grown men suspending their games and looking to each other and then inwardly puzzling over the pale insert of pre-dusk that cycle when left to its natural course does scarcely without subtleties lack overtake someone. As subtle as small dogs' snappy barks, yet oddly unimposing and hyper-gradual as these men dropped their guns or mindlessly relaxed them without design, they from sitting or hunched positions ever slowly felt against the ground to find their feet, less like windshield accessory and like hood ornaments instead when men inched toward fronts of vehicles. Grumbling in the face of ill-compensating formless formulations went off of bumpers and dirt roadside railguards scuttling, to their dismay, what is this? The way that the men turned their forehead-aligning hands into makeshift visors and shielded their gander toward sky as though into a solar eclipse, staring unnerved the charged man inside of the utility house office. What in hells are they looking at? The window appearing as the mirror outside was itself shaded. He grabbed his hat, tugged at his holstered gun and scurried out to take a closer look, when outside of the office door tripping over one of the encampment hounds who'd eluded its master somehow, squealing instead of barking when kicked. The captives inside seemed to be on the verge of a clue eluding these soldiers and administrators when the former alerted others to what they were seeing in the stone-faced men, both appearing like ordinarily dressed civilians and plain-clothes palace centurion guards. These who appear in manner like prophets somehow only wear to the eye outside appearing like common tradesmen instead of immersed in some social or political office or concern. 30 years old or so, each of them appearingly outwardly similar as though related in men who were unnerved by soldiers or guns or beleaguered by a thought outside of what compelled them in the least bit, as though exhibiting only a form of supernatural preoccupied detail inside of which were they per thought per motion per capita deeply steeped. This was real actual time, live and in Joel's stomping grounds, only in zones marked on Commandant's charge maps and on a young Joel Webber's lost diary page who'd experienced the odd feeling of relieving self from a trace of guilt semblance, for with his young hand feeling like he had in a way divined their steps. Marked as fortifiables. He reasoned with himself as though in advisory capacity. He thought, Eli, younger than I, made me promise him that I would pray to know the difference between God's concealing hand and his hand meant for the revealing for others, that I might discern the difference. How could he have known and kept even this knowledge in perfect confidence? Knowing that my part should in time be with responsibility required, yet he perfectly and, damn him, irresponsibly leaves this earth before into revelations and seeing the resolve in what still eludes me, ever eluding though. Miss you, my maestro lyrical master in crime. The rapture, ask the charge commander. The many praying singing ones gones. The people detesting both them and us still here. Clawing at soils only with their petitions to the God who doesn't listen, soils and soot and dust in their new mountain terrains resort in Gloryland out there. Do you have the better explanation? Maybe 1/3 of them's gone with gates still securely locked. Aliens, right. When all else fails and the nukes aren't obliterating fleshes, it's always the littles green big-eyed and headed otherworldlies, yeah. Get yours guns. Ellipsis. A little under half of them are, 1/3, matter of scientific fact. Gone from our weapons cache. And stay tuned for more of 70. All rights reserved, Ely James, 2023.
That's 70. Eli James, all rights reserved, 2023. Today would be November 30th, 2024. Day after Thanksgiving. And do look for this product in paperback, ebook, hardcover, and audiobook soon through Xlibris Publishing. All rights are reserved. That'll be stamped with 2024 or 2025. And probably going into the new year. And see if we're going to bring that out on the big screen anywhere soon. I'm going to pitch the heck out of it and wish for the best there, because it's very timely. And I'll just leave that for you to discover in the future. Have a good day. Have a good night.